horsepower, short track package, spoilers, splitters, all of this seems to be the hot topic right now in the NASCAR world. Everyone wants to talk about the short track packages, the short track car, how the next gen car performs on short tracks, however you want to phrase it. It's the hot topic right now. So we're going to talk about it today. We talked about it a little bit on Friday, the drivers' initial reactions to the first few laps. Since the few changes they made to the car for the 2024 season. But some more drivers have made comments on it, on what they think they should do, or, who they think they should talk to, things like that, some different opinions. Kyle Larson had a very opinionated, I guess, couple of quotes when he visited the Dale Jr. Download while he FaceTimed in. But and then Denny Hamlin had his thoughts. And then Chris Rice, he is one of the higher-ups at Colleague Racing. I'm not sure his official title, if he's president or whatever. But he had some opinions as well, so we're going to talk about those. Let you guys listen to some quotes. But the big one was Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson, driver of the number 5 for Hendrick Motorsports, has been there since 2021, has a Cup Series championship, highly regarded talent in NASCAR. He had an opinion on what they should do, or on, what he's heard and all of that stuff. Well, I'll just let you listen to it first.
Difference in top speed to minimum speed would be much greater. So I think that would allow you to, create different styles of how to get around the corner. I think, too, it's just going to allow for drivers to make more mistakes as you're entering the corner much faster, and or not necessarily much faster, but having to lift much earlier. I think it makes the braking zones longer, which, helps. So, too, and I think when you have that power, you can, like I said, run different lines and use that horsepower to accelerate. So I hope someday in my career that, they can at least try it, like just take us to, I don't know, somewhere, Richmond or wherever, and go test, go to Martinsville, go test it, try it out. I feel like they've always used the excuse of, or at least I've heard the excuse of, well, we're trying to keep horsepower to where, other manufacturers might want to come in. Well, as long as I've been in the sport, which is longer than 10 years, it's been the same 3 manufacturers. So maybe somebody else is coming, and maybe they're the ones pushing for lower horsepower, but I've yet to see anybody new come in, and all these, engine builders and teams are saying it's not going to cost any different to do it. I've heard our, Scotty Maxim say the same thing. He's like, dude, we could bring 1,000 horsepower next week,
right?
And it not more.
Yeah, so Larson, he quite a few quotes to really break down there, to kind of process there. Let's talk about the big one first, the horsepower thing. So currently the Cup Series cars are at 670 across the short tracks, road courses, and the intermediates. The only difference in horsepower is at the super speedways, where they lower it to somewhere in the low 500s, just because, super speedways are crazy. That's the fastest they go. They're packs. You don't want the cars flipping and stuff. But anyways, the short tracks, the intermediates, and road courses all share the same horsepower, but they do have small differences on the cars in terms of, spoilers, in terms of some of the underbody stuff, in terms of the diffuser. But ultimately, the big thing that gets talked about is the horsepower. The horsepower, as I've said multiple times now, is the same, but there's been a big push for the horsepower to increase at the short tracks and the road courses, because the racing there in the next gen era has not been as good as it was in previous years. Well, NASCAR has not budged on this idea. They want to stay at 670, and drivers, teams, even the manufacturers have said, yeah, we can go up on horsepower, but there's never been really a specific, I feel like there's been no number thrown out. I know some drivers have said, oh, I want to go to, 1,000 horsepower or something, or back into 900 like we were in 2014. But, I feel like there's never been a number thrown out there. Well, yesterday or today, whenever the Dale Jr. download was released, Kyle Larson gave a number, and he said 1,000. He said he talked to someone at the Hendrick Engines department, and that person at the Hendrick Engines department said that it was possible that next week at Bristol Motor Speedway, if they wanted to, they could raise that horsepower up to 1,000. Now, I was thinking last week when I talked about it, I was like, if you want to up the horsepower, it seems reasonable from what I've heard. From what everyone says, you could raise it up to maybe back to 750, maybe even 800, but that might be pushing it. I don't know all the details, but maybe that seems realistic. But no, apparently you can go up to not 800 to 1,000, and it not be a problem. It would not be extra cost. The teams could do it, and as long as it's not a cost, sure, why not? But ultimately, NASCAR has not budged on adding horsepower. And my guess to why, we'll talk about the excuse NASCAR uses every single time later in about a minute or so. But my guess is they want to make it more understandable or more simple for the average viewer or for the NASCAR fan. We went so many years from 2018, 2019 to 2021, which really isn't that many years, but we went for those years where we'd go to a short track in a road course and we'd have 750 horsepower. The spoiler would be small. We'd have all these differences that we'd have to talk about and, these different specifics. But then we'd go to the intermediates and it's a 550 horsepower. You got a bigger spoiler back there, more differences. And then you go to the super speedways and you've got 500 horsepower. You've got an even bigger spoiler. You've got this wicker bill. You've got all these differences. And sometimes, it can be hard to keep up with, especially when, this upcoming week, we're going to be using the intermediate package at Bristol. It can get very confusing to keep up with. And I think NASCAR's goal with this next-gen car was to have everything the same. The car, you could take it 1 week from Martinsville, and then you could take it to Michigan the next week, and you wouldn't have to do much other than change, the gear ratios, changing, maybe a couple of things, but for the most part, you can keep the car almost the same each and every week to make it more easy to understand. But ultimately, the car has raced great on the intermediates, but not so much on the road courses. And so NASCAR, they've had to make changes regardless to the car in terms of just body parts, diffuser, as I said, spoilers, but it hasn't really made much difference. If it has, I'm talking like that much of a difference has been made. So the drivers have been vocal, the teams have been vocal, the fans have been vocal about wanting some sort of change. And it's always asking about horsepower. When can we add horsepower to the car? When can we get a little bit more power in there? But NASCAR has not budged. And the reasoning that they've gave, as long as I can remember, is we're trying to entice new manufacturers. We're trying to get someone new in here, whether it's someone who's been here before like Dodge, whether it's someone new like Honda, whoever it may be. NASCAR wants to get a new manufacturer in, and keeping the horsepower lower in the 500 to 700 range somehow is more appealing to these manufacturers. But we haven't seen a new manufacturer since Toyota joined in 2008, 2009. We've seen Dodge leave, but we've never seen anyone else join. So Larson talks about that. Larson says, he's been in NASCAR for more than a decade now. I think he started his NASCAR career in 2013, 2014. And there's been no new manufacturers in his time in NASCAR. He's heard it talked about a lot. He's heard, we're trying to get new manufacturers, but nothing's happened. So at what point does NASCAR say, all right, we're not going to get a new manufacturer just sitting here at 500 to 700 horsepower. Let's, do something different. And whether it's due to cost or whether it's due to whatever the reason is, at what point, as I said, does NASCAR just say, all right, screw it, we're going to up the horsepower at these short tracks? And then Larson just kind of talked about look, man, you don't even have to change it next week. You don't have to change it next month. Just test it. Try something different at Martinsville, Richmond. Put a bunch of horsepower in the car. Go to those tracks and try something new. I guess we'll figure out how NASCAR responds to that in the next few months or years, or maybe it never happens. But some of the specifics Larson talked about, he said, it makes the braking zones longer because you have that extra power. You're able to get a higher top speed. The lower speed is going to be lower because you're going to be braking more. So the bigger gap between the top speed and the low speed, the bigger the gap, means the more the cars are sliding around, the more drivers can make mistakes, the more moves you can make, the more lanes you can use, the more small things that you can do on track to make your car better, to make the racing better. But ultimately has not happened yet. But my concern, and it kind of goes with what Chris Rice said, would be that the field would get more spread out. And that's why I know that I just guessed and speculated, whatever, that NASCAR wanting to keep the horsepower the same on all tracks except for the super speedways to kind of make things more simple. This would ultimately break it, but I feel like right now we should not touch what's happening on the intermediate tracks. The racing on the intermediates right now is fantastic. Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago was a great race. Racing at Kansas, Charlotte, Vegas over the next gen era has been top tier, and it's been great racing. Drivers have been driving their butts off, and we've had great racing. We've seen long runs, short runs, chaos, whatever it may be. We've seen it all, and it's been great. And that's why for the intermediate package, NASCAR did a great job with this next-gen car. Don't touch it. The short track and road course package, you got to touch that one a little bit. You got to mess with it a little bit. You got to do something different and not just raise or shrink the spoiler again. You got to put some more power in there. But there is the concern that the field could get more spread out. We saw Christopher Bell this last week win by 6 seconds. That could become a more common occurrence. We used to see it all the time in like 2018. Harvick would win by 10 seconds. Truex would win by 8. Kyle Busch would win by 6. And that bores fans. Yes, you look at F1 right now, when Max Verstappen's up the road 25 seconds, no one wants to see that. I don't think we'll ever get to that point in NASCAR where it's a weekly occurrence, but people don't want to see that. People want to see different winners. People want to see different leaders. They want to see fights for the lead. They want to see, a 3-wide photo finish at Atlanta. Yeah, now that's not going to happen every week, but we want to see closer gaps, and the ultimate concern would be if Kyle Larson, with 1,000 horsepower car at Bristol or, Martinsville, wherever it may be, if he has the best car, if he's the best driver that day, and he whips the field, there's only 7 cars on the lead lap, and he wins by 8 seconds, it's like, oh, well, what are we doing here? We just added all this horsepower to let one guy whip the field. And it's an understandable concern on Chris Rice's part and, a lot of people's part. If you do add the horsepower, there are things, regardless of whatever direction you go, if you don't change the car, if you add up to 1,000 horsepower, there's pros and cons to both sides, regardless of what you do here. But that is one of them. And another one that Chris Rice mentioned was, reliability. I've got to be honest. I don't know, adding horsepower, I don't know what it does to the rest of the engine, what it does to the rest of the car. But, obviously if you change the engine, if your car's set up for a certain amount of engine power and you start to use more, much more, a high percentage more, I don't know what that does to the rest of the car, but there is the risk of potentially damaging the engine or damaging the car, having mechanical failures, which, honestly, these cars have been pretty reliable for quite a while now. So you don't see a lot of mechanical failures. We saw some early on in the next gen era, but for the most part, these cars have been very reliable. So you do run that risk, but once again, there's pros and cons to each side. And then Denny Hamlin, he said it's not a hard task. This is coming from not only a driver, but a team owner. Denny Hamlin, he said it's not a hard task. He said these engines, the engine builds or something, builds, whatever. I couldn't really understand fully what he said, but he said that they're the same that they were back when they had 900 horsepower back in 2014. And then, his co-host on his podcast said, well, what's the answer? Why can't you raise the horsepower? Why? And then he said, call Jim France. He knows that answer. I don't know why we haven't. Call Jim France. So ultimately, it's going to be a debate for a while until something happens. You guys who've watched me know where I stand, but I'm curious to see how NASCAR responds. I don't think they're going to react off this one Phoenix race. Phoenix has never been the greatest for racing, and you can do what you want with that. But after Richmond, after Martinsville, they'll get a better feel for it. Even maybe Coda, they'll get a better feel for how the car races, and ultimately, then they might make a decision. Then they might start, throwing around ideas of what to do. Will NASCAR add horsepower? I'm pessimistic. They haven't done so for quite a while. I mean, technically they did from the old gen to the next gen. They went from 550 to 670, but to 1,000, I don't think they'll go that extreme, but it seems that it's possible. Kyle Larson said it's possible. He said he talked to some people at Hendrick, and I guess it's possible. So just an interesting topic, just an interesting debate that's been going on for quite a while. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you want to see happen with the car in terms of the engines and stuff? But yeah, it's a fun topic. It sucks that we have to, talk about the racing not being great, but, it does make for some entertaining off-track debate, off-track talk. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a busy day today in the news. Made a couple of videos this morning, but we got Bristol this weekend. Hopefully it's a fun one, and I will see you guys in the next video.